The red dawn over King's Landing bled slowly into the streets, stroke by lingering stroke, as though the sky itself resolved to repaint the broken city with patient, meticulous care where dragon flame had rendered it charred and brittle. Rising smoke carried a faint sweetness. Cedar roof beams burned to embers, commingled with the acrid bite of lime dust and pulverized marble. In that first hush of morning after the storm, the ruins whispered, but they did not wail. The crackle of timbers and the low hiss of steam where stone still bled out its stored heat were now the city's only chorus, punctuated by distant, tentative voices calling out names, testing the air for the right to hope. Daenerys Targaryen stood upon the scorched parapet of the Red Keep. Her black boots dusted a ghostly gray, hands folded behind her back, hair tousled by a salt-flecked breeze blowing in from Blackwater Bay. Drogon slumbered against the far curtain wall, vast wings half unfurled, torn membranes twitching with dream. The dragon's breath rose in slow gusts, heat shivering the morning light, but the rhythm calmed her. All night she had remained beside him, one hand upon the warm scale-plated neck, whispering wordless comfort to beast and to self alike, for their griefs had intertwined beyond untangling. The city below lay gutted, yet alive. Tiny figures moved, men and women with buckets, children clinging to skirts, red cloaks of unsullied patrols, ants scurrying across rubble as though waging quiet war against despair itself. They formed bucket chains to the river, hauled ropes, braced teetering walls, freed the trapped. The living worked, and work meant tomorrow might be more than ashes. An hour after sunrise, footsteps approached across the shattered flagstones. The clink of manacles rang once, then ceased as the guards halted. Daenerys did not turn at first, though she knew the cadence of that limp. Tyrion Lannister, his left knee still weak from the long crawl through damp cavern rock, beneath Casterly Rock all those years ago. "You summoned me, your grace." His voice was hoarse, the hoarseness of one who had spent the previous night without sleep, atoning in silence. At the sound, adrenaline rose sharp and hot within her. Memories answered. The weary counsel, the pleading eyes, the final betrayal. Rings of keys to Jaime pressed into the dwarf's palm. But in their wake came another memory, still raw. Missandei's head tumbling from the city wall, the moment the last thread of mercy snapped. Somewhere beyond logic, Daenerys recognized that she herself had left wisdom's path long before Tyrion's choice, and in that recognition lay the bleak seed of forgiveness. "Remove his chains," she said without turning. The guards hesitated, but her tone admitted no argument. Links rattled to the stones. Tyrion exhaled, rubbing red chafed wrists. A thin line of dried blood marked his temple, where a falling brick had grazed him during the tumult. Only then did she face him. Gray ash clung to his eyebrows, accentuating the gold of his irises, like rings set in tarnished silver. He looked up, met her eyes, did not flinch. No defiance remained, merely exhaustion. A soul stripped bare. "When last we spoke," she began, "I vowed to show you what happens to traitors." "And you did," he answered softly, gaze drifting over the cityscape. "You showed it to everyone." The riposte cut, but she accepted the wound. "I stand before the consequences of my choices," she said, and allowed her eyes to roam the ruin until they found, far off, the blackened dome of the sept, collapsed like a hollow egg. "Do you?" A faint tremor moved through him, but he bowed his head. "You spared me." "Why?" "Because you cared for the people I claimed to fight for. Enough to defy me." She lifted a hand, stilling his protest before it formed. "Your pity angered me. It forced me to face how far I had drifted from the breaker of chains I once believed myself to be. If I kill every voice of dissent, I will never hear truth again." Her fingers curled against her palm. "And I need truth, Lord Tyrion, even when it wounds." He swallowed. "Truth, then. The realm fears you now." "They should," she replied, the old fire flashing. "Fear preserves order. Yet, fear cankers. It breeds conspirators in every shadowed hall. I have witnessed it." His voice fell to a whisper. King Daenerys taught that lesson too well. The name dangled between them, like a corpse from a gibbet. She nearly recoiled, yet forced herself still. "Advise me," she said at last. "Redeem your errors. Redeem mine if you can." Silence stretched. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries echoing through broken archways. Then Tyrion's shoulders straightened by inches, as though memory of purpose lent him new sinew. "Begin with the living," he said. "Not with decrees or thrones, but with water and bread. The city bleeds. Heal it, and the people may yet choose love over fear." "Ensemble," she considered. Weeks ago, the call would have sounded weak, almost childlike beside the roar of dragons. Now the absence of roaring left a void keen for something gentler to fill it. "You would have me feed those who curse my name. Feed them precisely because they curse your name," he countered. "Mercy, when unearned, is remembered longest." For a moment she glimpsed Barristan Selmy's ghost nodding agreement, and Ser Jorah's gentle smile, counsels drowned in the fiery whirlwind she herself had unleashed. She inhaled slowly, tasting smoke, iron, the tang of new possibilities. "Very well," she said, feeling the words settle like stones. "Show me how to begin." Rah! They began in the dragon pit, that shattered amphitheater upon Rhaenys Hill where the great beasts of old had once been chained and left to wither. Dragonfire had shattered half its dome, but the deep subterranean vaults remained intact. Cool, cavernous, capable of storing grain and water torn from private granaries. Even the city's wealthiest had abandoned their riches in the chaos. Unsullied patrols confiscated sacks of barley, kegs of oil, wheels of aged cheese. Daenerys signed the orders herself, line after line in the looping Valyrian script she favored for state matters. Each order ended with the Targaryen seal pressed in dark red wax. A three-headed dragon coiled around a sheaf of wheat. A subtle alteration she had commanded that morning. "A sigil for peace," she told Grey Worm when he raised an eyebrow. The commander accepted the wax token, though puzzlement flickered in his eyes. He followed orders still, but something in him stood on a precipice. She kept him close, mindful that loyalty tortured by doubt might crack without warning. By midday, a line formed outside the dragon pit. Gaunt small folk, mud-cake soldiers from every vanquished banner, wounded looters hobbling on improvised crutches, and even a handful of high-born ladies whose gilded mantles now served as bandages for neighbors' burns. Daenerys descended from her horse and walked the line barefoot, ash dust puffing with each step. She spoke little at first, only listening. Tales of children trapped beneath fallen houses, of wells fouled by soot, of brothers lost and found, and lost again. The people stared at her warily, unsure whether to bow or spit. Some did both. Tyrion trailed a few paces behind, noting names, mapping wards in his mind. "If you mean to rebuild," he murmured, "you'll need masons paid in coin, not promises." "Cersei's treasury is mine now," she answered. "Let the gold dragons serve living men rather than line a tomb for a dead lioness." He allowed himself a crooked grin. "You might do with that phrase on banners." She raised an eyebrow. "No banners. Not yet. I'll not claim triumph while the smoke still rises." That decision echoed through streets like a soft drumbeat. What banners did appear were modest. White cloth bearing a single three-headed dragon outlined in gray, symbols of mourning rather than conquest. The small folk accepted bowls of boiled grain and slices of salted pork from unsullied soldiers who served in silence. Helmets removed, faces plain for all to read. At first, suspicion hung heavy, but hunger scratched louder than fear, and soon the lines moved briskly. When, on the third night, Daenerys called council in the Tower of the Hand, its blackened windows propped open to let out smoke from the collapsed roof. Candles guttered in cracked silver sconces, and charred plaster peeled from walls like shedding bark. Tyrion, hair newly shorn to remove singed curls, stood beside an upturned wine barrel that served as table. Between them lay a city map scored with crimson chalk lines. Fire corridors, rubble clusters, survivor enclaves. "We repair water first," said a woman's voice from the shadows. "Davena sand, bastard niece of the late Prince Dornish substitution, had ridden north with 200 spearmen to pledge to Daenerys. Slim, amber-eyed, she wore desert leathers dyed midnight blue. "Brave the aqueducts," she continued, tapping the map, "and the fountains flow again." Next to her, Archmaester Beldekar, the lone scholar of the Citadel, brave, or foolhardy, enough to linger, nodded. The old Valyrians carved their channels through black basalt. "Stronger than your high tower granite, my lord." His mustaches quivered as he spoke. "A week's labor to clear sediment, and a month to settle disputes over rights," muttered Tyrion. He glanced at Daenerys. "Water flows along old oaths. The faith militant once policed fountains here. With the sept shattered, the faithless now scavenge." Daenerys traced a fingertip along an auxiliary channel. "Then grant clerics authority again. They may hate me, but let them bless clean water in my name, and they'll tether their flock to my reign through their bellies." Daenerys barked a laugh. "You mean to bribe the seven?" "I mean to feed the living," Daenerys said, calm. Grey Worm leaned forward into candlelight. The burn along his jaw, received from a ricocheting ember the day of the attack, had not fully healed. "Let the unsullied guard the dig sites. The people trust soldiers who do not speak." "Trust," Tyrion echoed. An ambitious word given yesterday's massacre. The room stilled. All eyes slid to Daenerys, but she did not look away. "We own what we have done," she said, "and we spend every waking breath repairing it." In that moment, a subtle shift occurred. Eyes that had measured distance to the door now measured distance to purpose. A council was born, not of ceremony but of necessity, hammered into shape by guilt and hope alike. Ra. Days stretched into weeks, measured not by courts or jousts, but by the number of cisterns cleared, the tons of bricks salvaged, the dead counted and named. A hush of mourning persisted. Bells tolled at dawn and dusk, each peal a vow that no fallen soul would be forgotten. The faith militant, leaderless after the sparrows scattered, approached Daenerys with wary delegation. She met them barefooted again, built no throne room dais, offered neither apology nor boast. Instead, she granted their high septon, elect the right, to sanctify labor crews. They accepted under condition that she rebuild the sept's infirmaries first. She agreed. The pyramids of Meereen had taught her bureaucracy, how to move grain, quell nobles, reweave the tangled net of loyalty. But Westeros asked something else altogether. A dance upon shards of the old world while forging a new rhythm. She found herself walking markets at dusk, unguarded save by Grey Worm and Daenerys, ear bent to haggling fishwives and blacksmith laments. She learned the smells of dockside plague before the coughing fits began. She tasted river mud to judge its silt content. She wrote edicts in the common tongue so any literate child might read the law aloud to elders. And she listened to Tyrion. They met nightly on the parapet now cleared of rubble. Their conversation meandered like a slow brook over stones. Histories of famine and bounty, of roads and taxes, of Rhaenys Targaryen's love for songs, and how she once pardoned a rebel bard to win a city's heart. Tyrion poured 2 cups of pale arbor gold each evening, and drank only half his. He told stories of Jaime, of Catelyn Stark's quiet fury, of the mountain sack of the Riverlands. He confessed old sins. Wildfire explosion beneath the Blackwater, lies told to Shay. And Daenerys in turn spoke of the fighters crucified at Meereen's gates, of the whipped back of a girl called Dalla the Spring, whose courage had steadied her once, of the loneliness born from prophecy's weight. In the sharing, a bridge formed. When Daenerys slept now, her dreams no longer throbbed with screams alone. Sometimes she found herself walking lush fields, where children chased goats under a wholesome sun. Sometimes she awoke weeping from relief she could not name. When, one dawn, 6 weeks after the fires, Drogon rose from his perch and took wing, circling the city thrice before alighting on Visenya's hill. The dragon's shadow glided across half-mended streets, and people froze in terror, until Drogon landed among piles of crushed stone, lowered his head, and began nudging fragments like a gigantic hound digging for a bone. An astonished crowd gathered at a distance. Daenerys, alerted by the commotion, hurried barefoot down the half-repaired stair of the keep. She found Drogon clawing aside a collapsed column, exposing cracked mosaics beneath. When she called his name, he rumbled deep in his chest and stepped aside. There, in the newly cleared hollow, lay an ancient cistern shaft, long forgotten, its wellspring water still clear as blue glass. Drogon lowered his massive head and lapped once, steam curling from his nostrils. Then he looked to her, waiting. The onlookers gasped as she laid a hand on the dragon's horned brow. "Here," she told the masons scrambling forward. "Dig here. The dragon remembers where our ancestors drank." Word of Drogon's discovery spread like dawnlight itself. By that evening, water gushed through hastily hammered pipes into the hill districts, quenching thirst the aqueduct crews had yet to reach. Children danced in spray from leaks, mothers filled earthen jars. A chant rose, soft, uncertain but growing. Blood of the dragon, water of life. It rolled along lanes, across merchant squares, bouncing off battlements until it reached the parapet where Tyrion leaned, listening. He could not help the wetness in his eyes. Daenerys found him there, wiping tears with a crooked smile. "Will wonders never cease," he muttered. Killed by flame, saved by flame. She watched smoke curls drift from chimneys once cold, watched a washerwoman pour clean water over a small pile of linens. "I will not forget again," she whispered. "Every life under my wing is mine to guard, not to terrify." Tyrion inclined his head. "Hold to that, my queen, and the realm will rebuild itself around you." And her munch again. Yet not all hearts softened. In cellars beneath Flea Bottom and in manors along the gullet, whispers gathered like flint sparks. Lords Dorcas Tully and Albert Mertens, whose families had bled for Cersei, plotted revenge. From the Reach came envoys bearing roses gathered from graves, a silent accusation. And beyond the narrow sea, the Golden Company's remnants limped back to Lys, their commander bitter with defeat. Rumor claimed they sought new coin from unseen patrons. Daenerys invited the Reach envoys to supper in the partially restored small hall. She served them barley stew, same as eaten by builders in the streets, and poured them wine from common pottery cups. Some frowned, some wept. By evening's end, Lady Meredith Rowan offered her house's seed stores to feed the Crownlands, and in return Daenerys pledged workers to replant Tyrell fields ravaged by drought. Deals struck on humble terms bound faster than ransoms paid in silk. Still, sabers rattled in darkness. One night, a dozen cloaked men infiltrated Blackwater Row, torched a relief granary, and stamped crimson roses onto the scorched door. 50 mouths went hungry the next day. Daenerys stood among the debris at dawn, rubbing soot between her fingers, fury pulsing like a second heart. Grey Worm presented 3 captured arsonists, ragged youths seized by chance. The commander awaited execution orders. The populace watched, breath bated. Would the Dragon Queen's mercy hold when pricked? Tyrion watched too, eyes pleading caution. Daenerys approached the trembling youths, barefoot, as always lately, and asked their names. One stammered Willem, another Joss, the third muttered nothing. She asked why. "No queen, no ashes," said Willem, chin quivering. "We lost our kin, only wanted ye to hurt like us." She closed her eyes, inhaled long. The street smelled of char once more. Then she spoke, voice steady. "You have harmed your neighbors, not me. You burned bread from their mouths." She gestured to masonry crews. "You will build granaries now, until calluses line your palms and your stomach knows true hunger no more." She looked to Grey Worm. "Chains, but only enough to discourage flight. Feed them with the workers." The sentence rippled outward. Hard labor, not heads on spikes. Some cried justice denied. Others breathed easier. Tyrion exhaled relief. Grey Worm saluted, though his eyes mirrored storm clouds. "And Fendenator, Mon. Obisirse." The seasons tipped toward harvest. From Dragonstone arrived Lady Alanis Valerian. Sails silver in moonlight. She offered fleets to carry grain north where new summer cold stunted crops. In Winterfell, Queen Sansa Stark, coronated sovereign of an independent north, sent ravens lauding the flow of shipments, and quietly inquired if peace might be signed upon ice-forged parchment. Daenerys penned her own hand. Sister Queen, may the winds carry us both toward gentler shores. She sealed it with wax-flecked gold leaf, dragon, and wheat. Slowly, King's Landing changed. Gardens sprouted in burned courtyards, seeded with beans and saffron. Sculptors used collapsed stones to carve benches and memorials. Bells tolled softer now, marking births as often as deaths. Children raced across the plaza once choked by ash, chasing a black and white goat gifted by Dornish riders. And each dusk, atop the ruined sept steps, silver-haired Daenerys knelt to lift rubble piece by piece, joining lines of penitents silently undoing what Dragonfire had done. Many nights Tyrion found her there long after moonrise, arms streaked with dust, breath white in the cool air. "Take rest," he urged. "I rest when the city does," she answered. One night he protested further, reminding her that a ruler's strength lay in vision, not in sore muscles. She studied him, then simply offered a stone. He hesitated, then laughed and set it aside. Together they cleared a half-collapsed arch until the moon shone through, tracing pale bars over her face. In that light, he glimpsed neither conqueror nor savior, but a woman determined to earn. And he loved her in that instant, not with the hunger that once doomed him with Shay, but with reverence reserved for impossible things proven possible. Inandadan. The first snows fell early, swirling white around the half-rebuilt towers like shaken feathers. Fires burned in every district, not for destruction, but for warmth. Each brazier ringed by storytellers. Daenerys ordered surplus grain cooked into spiced porridges and delivered by cart to Frostwood Hill, where many homes still lacked roofs. She rode beside the cart, cloaked in quilted wool, Drogon circling overhead in slow, watchful arcs that cast fleeting shadows over the snow. The children called the dragon Great Hearth, for his fiery breath melted ice thick on the aqueducts. When he landed near a stalled wagon buried axle deep, he warmed the frozen wheels until wood steamed. Farmers bowed to the beast, as to a surrogate saint. Daenerys scratched between Drogon-scaled ridges, whispering high Valyrian lullabies. The dragon crooned, eyes half-lidded, content. That evening, Tyrion found her seated by a brazier, outside a modest weaver's shop. Snowflakes hissed as they landed on coals. She offered him a cup of mulled wine. "My queen," he said, sipping. "5 moons ago I feared you would burn the realm entire. Tonight, the realm toasts you with ginger and honey." She cradled her own cup. "I may yet fail them." "Perhaps," he conceded. "But failure stalks every throne. Choosing to rebuild, rather than rule through dread buys, you allies stronger than iron. Gratitude, memory, the quiet pride of a people lifting themselves from ruin." Desimnoan. She watched snow spiral around Drogon's outstretched wings. "When I was a girl in Bravos," she murmured, "I dreamt of Mother, of the Red Keep's gentle halls. Later, I dreamt of freeing slaves, but I never dreamt of mending walls my own fury toppled. This is new ground. I tread softly." "Nah." "Softly," Tyrion echoed, "but not alone." He gestured to the bustling street. Bakers hauling trays of fresh crusts to soldiers on patrol. Masons singing off-key as they shaped rough stones. A dozen children following Davina Sand, laughing at her exaggerated Dornish curse words. "They rebuild because you bend to lift stones beside them." Daenerys closed her eyes, feeling snow collect on her lashes. She saw, behind the darkness, a vision of 7 years hence. Orchards blooming where fire pits once smoldered. White sails crowding Blackwater Bay. Markets filled with spices from distant Korth and pelts from White Harbor alike. She saw a council hall without thrones. Only tables where voices overlapped in vigorous necessary disagreements. She saw Drogon perched on a distant hill, old and enormous, content to watch a realm that no longer feared him. And she heard Tyrion's laughter, older but unbroken. She opened her eyes. 5 hours of story still await us, she said softly. quoting the promise she had made to the people that the tale of their rebuilding would be told across long nights of winter, never rushed. Let us not hurry the dawn. Tyrion raised his cup to clink gently against hers. Snowflakes hissed, brazier flames leapt, and above, the dragon silhouette cut across a cold moon hanging over a city that dared to breathe again. When news reached them by raven thick with northern frost, Queen Sansa herself would journey south come spring, escorted by 100 shields of Winterfell, to witness the healing city and speak of trade. Elsewhere, Gendry Baratheon forged plowshares in Storm's End's renewed forges. The Riverlands boasted record barley harvests due to drainage ditches instructed by Davina's Dornish engineers. In Dorne, Princess Arianne offered shipments of citrus to ward off scurvy among port workers. All this the Master of Ravens reported during council, voice trembling with an excitement he scarcely contained. Yet amid bright tidings came word of shadow. A Lessene carrack anchored at Hull's End, its holds empty but for soldiers' pikes. On its deck, the banner of the Golden Company fluttered, a gray elephant charging through flame. Rumor named the paymaster Mors Prendal, who once marched against Daenerys at Yunkai and fled when she decimated their line. Vengeance, it seemed, had crossed seas. In the cellars of Maegor's Holdfast, Daenerys met with Tyrion, Grey Worm, and Davina. Candles flickered on the damp walls. Echoes of dripping water sounded like distant footsteps. Grey Worm urged immediate strike. Burn the ship before dawn. Scatter the company. Davina argued for parley. Perhaps the Sellswords came to trade swords for coin in peaceful service. Tyrion rubbed his temples, sensing the weight of every decision. Blood spilled anew could fracture what goodwill we have labored to forge, he warned. Allowing enemies to anchor uncontested invites doubt of our resolve. Grey Worm countered stiffly. Daenerys listened, fingers steepled. Fire beckoned her still. Its simplicity, its finality. But she tasted lingering ash on memory's tongue and forced the craving aside. We invite their captain to council, she said, under flag of truce. Let him speak his purpose. Tyrion exhaled. Grey Worm's jaw tightened, but he saluted. The die was cast. Tomorrow they would meet Sellswords beneath the Dragonstone banners repainted in gray. That night, Daenerys walked alone through the half-rebuilt throne room. The Iron Throne itself melted into a twisted carcass, still glinting beneath scaffolds. In the starlight that crept through shattered windows, the fused sword seemed less a seat than a warning. She touched a jagged blade, felt chill seep into her skin. The seat would remain forever empty. She had decreed it so. Westeros would not be ruled by one voice alone. Not again. Yet here in emptiness she wrestled ghosts, an urge to seize certainty, to silence storms before they brewed. Her reflection shimmered in a shard of bright steel, fractured and merging with the blade. Footsteps echoed. Tyrion appeared in the archway, lantern raised. He said nothing, merely stood sentinel to her sleepless vigil. When at last she turned, the sorrow in her eyes needed no words. He inclined his head, acknowledging burdens shared. Together they left the hall, leaving melted iron to glisten in solitary moonlight. Oh? Aye. Morning summoned a crisp breeze, smelling of salt and new-cut pine from docks, where carpenters mended hulls. The Golden Company's captain crossed the dockyard under escort of Unsullied, his fine orange cloak snapping. Mors Prendal was lean as a spear shaft, face weather-creased, eyes amber like wolf's teeth. He knelt before Daenerys on the pier. "Your Grace," he began, accent thick. "We come not to war. We come to offer service and forgiveness." He looked up, and something in his gaze smoldered. Resentment banked behind courtesy. Sellswords fight for coin. Yours appears plentiful. Tyrion chuckled. And if coin were scarce, would you raid these half-hungry streets? Prendal spread his hands. A sellsword fights or starves. Daenerys studied him. You fled Meereen when you had chance to strike my flank. Why? He hesitated. Because I saw the Unsullied break Yonkai's gates. Saw dragons sear siege towers. Because my men would die for another's pride. I choose life for them. She nodded slowly. Then choose life again. Swear your swords to rebuild. Help raise walls rather than topple them. Only then will I pay your company." He blinked. "Build?" "Yes," she said. "Stone by stone. Prove your valor and patience." Laughter rippled among his lieutenants, but Daenerys did not waver. Tyrion leaned upon his cane, fashioned recently from a mended mast, watching with faint smile. Prendel's eyes darted to Drogon where he perched on the half-ruined Septi's summit. The dragon yawned, exposing furnace guts. The captain swallowed. "We will build," he said. And so Sellswords, who once marched beneath elephants, carried bricks and mortar. They learned from masons of the Riverlands, took orders from Dornish forewomen, and sweated beside the very folk they once meant to terrorize. Some deserted, most stayed, for coin buys loyalty, but respect earns pride, and pride fed them in ways gold could not. Nia. Winter's deep heart settled. Snowdrifts lined avenues now cleared of debris, lamplight flickering on smooth new plaster. The dragon pit's dome remained shattered, but scaffolds crowned its crown. Artisans molded stained glass of wheat and flame to replace ancient bars. In taverns, musicians composed ballads of ashes to hearth, singing how the dragon's fury birthed winter's warmth. The lyrics changed nightly, some praising Daenerys, others reminding listeners of burnt kin. But all ended on a promise: out of ruin, a realm renewed. Daenerys spent evenings at the infirmary annex of the half-rebuilt Septet, reading to convalescents. She chose tales of Nymeria's voyage, of Bran the Builder shaping a wall against darkness, of Aegon first forging unity. She did not omit sorrow, nor did she shy from her own name written in pages not yet scribed. When she closed a book, she asked patience to tell her their stories. She listened, weaving strands of ordinary courage into the cloth of her reign. Tyrion meanwhile drafted charters, a council of guilds to advise on trade, a tribunal of free cities to arbitrate grievances, a rotating regency to govern in her absence should she journey abroad. He argued with maesters over parchment thickness, scribbled notes in margins, crossed out half by dawn. Daenerys learned city dialects, barking orders in accent no longer foreign. Grey Worm trained squads of orphans chosen for aptitude. They wielded spears with honor, not tyranny, and called themselves the Firewatch. Through it all, Drogon remained sentinel, patrolling skies beyond walls where bandits once lurked. When he circled overhead, chimneys dimmed to spare his eyes, but no one fled indoors. Children waved wooden dragons on sticks. Elders measured seasons by the pitch of his roar. He had become legend made flesh, not terror, but guardian. Oaneri. At last, on the eve of first thaw, Daenerys summoned her council atop the completed aqueduct tower overlooking the city. Lanterns bobbed in the river far below where fishermen hauled nets heavy with winter trout. Stars glittered overhead, the air crisp enough to excite every breath into fog. "It is time," she told them, "to call a conclave of the realm." Tyrion arched an eyebrow. "A grand assembly? The lords will come with grievances sharpened like daggers." "Let them," she said. "We cannot mend in secrecy. They must see the city. They must witness the people's voice." Daenerys inclined her head. "And if they demand their crowns restored, then show them streets where crowns mean little beside clean water," Daenerys replied. "Let them dine in soup kitchens, then judge their appetites." Grey Worm spoke last. "The Unsullied guard your peace, but peace must guard itself now. Otherwise, it is illusion." She rested a hand on his armored shoulder. "Which is why we invite them here, within these walls of honest labor. Let the truth stand before them. I am not conqueror. I am caretaker." Tyrion smiled, small and proud. "A caretaker with a dragon." "A caretaker," she repeated, tasting the word. "But we write a new page each day. And tomorrow, the realm shall write with us." And now, they lifted cups of warmed wine, no fanfare, only that simple gesture atop a tower, built by hands once raised against her. Lantern light shimmered in their eyes, and below them, King's Landing breathed like a great creature at rest. Streets pulsing faint gold, rooftops brushed silver by moon, chimneys exhaling dreams into the night. For the first time in living memory, the capital slept easy beneath dragon wings. Wow! Outside the city, the riverland's plum trees budded early, and in their pale blossoms could be read omens of the seasons yet to bloom. Harvest fairs along the Blackwater. Fleets laden with Braavosi glass docking in still waters. Songs rising in summer amphitheaters built where gallows once stood. And beyond that, the wheel of winters and summers would turn again as it always had. But each spoke now forged anew, stronger for the tempering fire, steadier for the hands that set it. In years to come, the chronicles would name that era the renewal, beginning on the day Daenerys Stormborn set aside throne and banner to walk barefoot among the wreckage. They would speak of her forging a covenant not upon parchment alone, but upon blistered palms and shared bread, of Tyrion Lannister once reviled, who coaxed truth into halls long deaf to it, of dragons tamed not by chains but by purpose, of a realm rebuilt with its people instead of over them. Yet for now, the story rested only half told, edges raw, melodies unresolved. Snow still dusted the roofs, and the distant banners of approaching lords still flapped with motives unknown. Evening bells tolled, and the city answered with murmured prayers and laughter, and the rhythm of hammers striking wood. From the parapet where flames once raged unchecked, Daenerys watched the flickering lights and felt their warmth on her face. Above her, Drogon folded his wings, lay his head beside her feet, and exhaled a gentle plume of steam that rose, white as promise, into the star-lit sky. PGSQL. A chill wind blew from the bay as dawn's first color barely touched the sky, yet the piers of King's Landing were alive with torches, lanterns, and a burble of voices waiting on the tide. The conclave of the realm, called by decree of Daenerys Targaryen, and borne on 700 ravens, was set to open the moment Sansa Stark's masted flagship slid into the mouth of the Blackwater. Wharf workers in patched wool stood shoulder to shoulder with gold-collared scribes from the counting houses, each craning for the same sight. A northern banner white as hoarfrost, bearing the howl of the dire. They had waded through the dark, stamping feet on planks slick with salt, gossiping while barge hands passed tin cups of thick oat broth. But conversation dropped away when a lookout cried sighting from the bluff, and a hush settled so deep even the line's mooring ships creaked like admonishing elders. Through the gray horizon Sansa's ship appeared, sails furled tight against a light crosswind, red lanterns glowing at her spar tips. An escort of 3 carvels followed, one from White Harbor, one from Bear Isle, and a lean half-decked longship rowed by 26 oarsmen in crimson-trimmed furs. Farther east, 5 battered war ketches of the Iron Fleet rolled on the swell, like prowling dogs, their captains under orders from Lord Gendry to keep watch, but not interfere. Since the Lion Queen's fall, the waters of Blackwater Bay had been busier than any time remembered. Traders from Dorne offloading citrus to stave off scurvy, cogs from Tarth stacked with marble for new quays. Braavosi bankers come to weigh the rumors of stability. Yet no arrival caused near the stirring as this one. Tyrion Lannister stood on the rebuilt breakwater, cloak snapping about his calves. Beside him, Grey Worm watched impassively, the handle of his spear wound in fresh leather, his burn scar nearly healed, but still shining with salve. Davena Sand waited a pace behind, collar of her blue riding coat frosted white. She muttered Dornish proverbs under her breath, to keep teeth from chattering, she later claimed. In truth, she vibrated with anticipation equal to any. She will want the bell towers, Tyrion said, squinting at the flagship's painted eyes. Queen Sansa is a shrewd one. The towers still gape with cannon holes. She will ask if we intend to leave them unrepaired. They stay unrepaired, Grey Worm answered. So dragons may land without obstruction. Tyrion's lips twitched. You are learning politics. I should worry. Grey Worm glanced down. I learned defense. Politics is Tyrion. A slander I can live with. He inhaled briny cold. They are coming to test Daenerys' vow, to see if city and queen truly changed. We have changed, Daenerys murmured, following the flagship's slow pivot toward dock. Though gods alone know whether enough. Ropes thudded onto pilings. Gangplanks clattered down. A northern guard captain strode first onto the pier to plant a banner of gray direwolf above a line of torch brackets. Then she turned, barked a command, and at once shields rose into 2 living walls down the plank's length. Sigils of sworn houses spaced like beads on a necklace. Umber's roaring giant, Manderley's white merman, Karstark's black sunburst. Between them stepped Sansa Stark. She wore ivory wool shot through with silver thread. The direwolf worked in jet at her collar. The cloak hem brushed weather-grade boards, but it was her hair that drew every eye. Copper red against the pallor of dawn, braided in a regal fall reflecting no capitulation. She paused a moment, perhaps measuring the hush, perhaps breathing in the scent of a city her family once dreaded, and then came forward with measured grace, her retinue following in lockstep cadence. Behind them walked Maester Walken, clutching a ledger, and a shy girl in sealskin boots, whose blue eyes drank everything. Tyrion advanced, bowing. "Your Grace." Sansa inclined her head. "Lord Tyrion, it seems the city did not devour you after all. I have grown less digestible with age." A faint smile touched her mouth before she turned to Grey Worm. "Commander." "Queen of the North," he replied, stepping aside in tacit escort. Sansa scanned the rising terraces toward the Red Keep, now half-veiled beneath wooden ribs of scaffolding, and draped with white banners bearing the muted dragon and wheat seal. "Is Her Majesty waiting within?" "No," Tyrion said. "She waits beyond, among the people gathering at Spicer's Market. She wished your first steps be taken through those streets, not corridors of ashes." Sansa's gaze lingered on him. She nodded once. "Lead on." "One." The procession wound uphill along cobbles, where once screams echoed. Now vendors selling root pies and spice cakes lined burlap stalls, waving when the northern cortege passed. Frost sparkled atop fresh mortar between new-laid stones. Children perched on shoulders to stare at direwolf shields. Some dared wave tiny cloth dragons as the queen had encouraged. Daenerys rode ahead with 2 Firewatch lancers, clearing path. Tyrion ambled by Sansa's side, pointing out where aqueduct stones still bore black scorch marks, where a Drogon talon had gouged chimneys that now ringed communal hearths. At Spicer's Market, the crowd thickened. On the old marble dais, once a pulpit where Cersei delivered condemnations, stood Daenerys. She wore a simple gown of river-gray wool tied at throat by a black ribbon. No crown shone there, only curls cascading free, snow melting silver in them. Wind tugged her skirts. Crisp daylight lent her skin a pale radiance against charred statue fragments piled like monuments to memory. Sansa paused 3 strides away. The murmuring throng hushed. Drogon, perched on the shattered dome of the great septi beyond, inclined his head toward the square, golden eyes narrowing as if he meant to hear human words. Daenerys stepped down from the dais and walked barefoot across the cold stone. Frost rimed her footprints before body heat melted it. She stopped just before Sansa and sank to one knee. Gasps scattered through the crowd like frightened birds. The Dragon Queen, on knee before Winterfell's. Even Sansa's breath caught. She reached forward almost involuntarily. "Your Grace." "Sister," Daenerys said, voice low but carrying. "I burned the city you come to see. I would rebuild it, but not alone. Take my hand if you would share the burden. If not, rise as witness to my vow." Sansa's cheeks flushed rose in the coal. She extended her gloved hand. "Rise, we share it." Fingers clasped, warmth meeting chill. Applause broke like thunderclap, though many still stared in disbelief. Some wept. Some knelt as the queens embraced briefly, then straightened. Daenerys lifted her voice. "Lords of the North, ladies of Winterfell, folk of every shore. Today we open a conclave not behind walls but in heart of our labors. Let every voice be heard, carpenter, count alike. Let no grievance fester. Let no kindness go unspoken." She gestured to benches arranged before the dais, planks laid on barrels, wreaths of pine atop each seat. As delegations found places, Mertens, Rowan, Tarth, houses great and minor, Tyrion guided Sansa to a table spread with quills and parchment. Daenerys remained on foot beside them. She would not sit for many hours thereafter. The first petition came from Lord Albert Mertens, whiskers trembling with indignation. The Crown's levies bleed our recovery. Wagon trains from the Reach pay gate fees thrice what once they did, and my holding sees not a penny return. Tyrion opened his ledger. Gate fees were doubled 6 moons ago to repair river docks you yourself burned retreating from the city walls. Murmurs rippled. Mertens bristled. Spoils of war do not void my ancient rights. Spoils of war, Daenerys repeated. Her voice even belonged by right to the living who must drink and eat and bury dead left by war. Your wagons pass gates rebuilt by twice orphan guilds, carpenters who charge nothing but wheel grease and tea to keep hands warm. She gestured toward the back of the market where sawdust still trickled from beams. Do you count that service cheap? The old lord flushed scarlet, but words died on his tongue when a murmur of assent rose from behind him. Not from courtiers, but from his own carters standing at ease near their oxen. They cheered the guild mention. Mertens withdrew, bowing stiffly. The next to speak was Lady Meredith Rowan, though her words were not grievance but offering. We bring seed potatoes hardened for northern soil, the first 20 wagons free of tariff, so that from here outward none hunger come next frost. She set a carved wooden box on the table, lid open to reveal pale starchy nodules. Sansa touched one gently, eyes brightening. Winterfell thanks you. King's Landing thanks you more, Daenerys said. Let us inscribe a new route, reach grain northward, northern timber southward. A channel of good faith, thicker than gold. And so through hours they braided promises into structure. Fish tithes in exchange for healers. Dornish citrons for Stormlander beeswax. Knights of unsullied labor pledged to raise orphanages in place of raised brothels. Sometimes arguments flared, over border lines, over restitution for a vineyard charred in Drogon's path. One Brackensworn knight demanded the queen kneel again. Grey Worm's spear butt hit flagstone like thunder. Tyrion poured more wine. Daenerys cracked a joke about Dornish asses. The tension eased. Daenerys never raised her voice, but neither did she flinch from consequence. A new levy on those houses whose levies once marched with Lannister gold, a remission of past debts for hamlets that had lost more than half their able bodies. As sun reached zenith, a horn blast rang from the east wall. All heads turned. Over rooftops curled black smoke from a granary near the dragon pit. Tyrion's brows knotted. Grey Worm was already moving, Daenerys beside him. They sprinted down lanes where snow turned to slush beneath frantic feet. Flame licked skyward, fed by pitch, meant to seal roof tiles. Unsullied bucket lines formed, but a small riot of sellsword laborers blocked them, faces smeared with soot, arms brandishing cudgels. Mors Prendal himself knelt on one knee, clutching a gash across brow, shouting in his native tongue for calm. 3 of his men lay unconscious at his back, skulls bloodied. Move, Grey Worm ordered. One laborer spat. We work, we bleed, still we starve. Grain for lords, never for us. Daenerys strode forward. No guards flanked her. She faced the knot of angry men, smoke wreathing her hair. Who told you the grain was for lords? The man sneered. Same lords lined up to eat meat while we chew chaff. She pointed to a wagon emblazoned with a fire and wheat seal toppled near the doors. These sacks were bound for soup pots in Misford Quarter where your children sleep. The fire they cook in will be ash if you burn it now. Help me save it. Soot-blackened faces wavered. A girl's voice rose among them. She could not have been more than 12, clinging to her father's leg. Papa, we said we'd eat tonight. The father's shoulders sagged. Club fell from hand. One by one, others lowered arms. Then Daenerys picked up a bucket and climbed the scaffolds. She heaved water onto flames. Embers hissed. Grey Worm joined. Silent. Daenerys scrambled up another ladder. Before long, even the sellswords formed a chain. The fire died to smoke, then to steaming wood. When the roof ceased glowing, Daenerys turned to Prendal. Blood stained his eyelid. Who incited this? Prendal wiped his face. Whispers among my men. In drink last night. A rumor of cut rations. Tyrion knelt by the unconscious sellswards, checking pulses. Daenerys scanned the crowd, eyes narrowing. At the periphery stood a figure in a green mantle, half-mask of silver clockwork covering one cheek. The instant their gazes locked, he slipped into an alley. "Grey Worm," Daenerys shouted. 2 Firewatch spearmen broke pursuit, but the alley was a maze. The stranger vanished. Daenerys addressed the laborers. "Tomorrow, I invite you to the conclave to speak your needs. Hunger breeds lies. Truth breeds bread. Will you come?" Nods, uncertain but real. She motioned them back to work. As they dispersed, she placed a hand on the shoulder of the father with the girl. "Tonight's soup lines double. Tell your friends." Memiporichstein. He swallowed hard, tears carving clean lines through soot. "Thank you, matey." "Thank me by eating," she said. "Gernawa." That evening, the conclave reconvened, by torchlight. Sansa had organized common tables. Long boards laid end to end, no high seats. Only benches where Lord and Mason together ate root stew thick with barley. Candles in tin cups provided glow enough to study faces. Daenerys, cheeks still streaked with smoke, stood before the assembly. "If trust is sand, then each of us holds only a handful," she said. "We may cast it to blind our neighbor or pour it into cracks to shore a wall. I choose walls. Will you?" Silence, then Meredith Rowan lifted her cup. Others followed. Row on row until even Mertens grudgingly tapped tin against his nephew's chalice. Yet the Queen's eyes searched for the sellsword contingent. They lingered at the edge, weary, some bearing fresh bandages. Daenerys raised her cup toward them, said nothing further. Mors Prendal returned the gesture at last, jaw set. It was enough for the moment. That night, Tyrion prepared to retire in the Tower of Hand, but a courier burst in waving scrap of parchment, thick as vellum, seal unbroken but bearing emblem unknown. Twin stallions rampant, not of any Westerosi house. The courier explained it was attached to a bolt fired into a butcher shop door. Tyrion snapped wax, squinted at blocky Brovosi script. "Well?" Daenerys prompted, perched on his battered table. Tyrion read aloud. "The debt of fire will be paid in blood when the last stone is laid." He frowned. Bravosi letters, but phrasing Lysine. "Someone stirs pot. Mender out to wire." "That masked man," Daenerys muttered. "A sellsword from Lys perhaps. Or a stage performer playing Lysine to disguise reach vowels." Tyrion sighed. "We have grown large enough to attract phantom enemies. I wonder how many hands truly grasp that news of healing is still threat to some." Daenerys slid off table. "Let me hunt the alleys. I have ears in low places." Tyrion caught her elbow. "No heroics alone. Take Firewatch pairs." She grinned feral. "No heroics, only curiosity." She left before his protests finished forming. When to know? Over the next 10 days, the conclave committees hammered out charters. Sansa chaired arbitration between Manderley merchants and Dornish spice traders. Her cool logic cut through their mutual suspicion like ice steel. Prendal's sellswords, now called the Elephants of the Hearth by small folk, half in jest, repaired quay pilings under a Northman foreman who taught them to whistle northern hymns. Children of Misford Quarter posted bright leaflets on alley walls announcing sack supper tonight. All come share. Grain consumption tripled in those nights, but crime fell in half. Yet sabotage struck again. 2 nights after the granary riot, 3 barrels of lamp oil were discovered stacked beneath supports of the new aqueduct. Fuse soaked and ready. Daenerys scouts found them minutes before dusk bells. Firewatch squads doused wicks. The barrels carried the same Twin Stallions brand, scored lightly onto hoop iron. Tyrion called an emergency council. In the keep's repaired solar, they gathered. Daenerys, Sansa, Tyrion, Grey Worm, Daenerys, Maester Wolkan, and Mors Prendal attended. Snow slashed the windows, wind moaning like mourners among broken Merlin. Candles cast jittering light across maps. "An assassin seldom warns before striking," Tyrion began, tapping the note's stallion seal. "Our saboteur, wants fear more than fire. Disruption of unity. Daenerys laid a scrap of green fabric on the table. The cloak shred recovered from the masked figure. "Darnish loom," she said. "My mother ran such cloth through her hands 1,000 times." She flexed fingers as though remembering. "But dyed in Gulltown Harbor, fish oil marinade leaves sour trace. I would wager Bravosi coin the cloth came by smuggler out of Gulltown, not Sunspear." "Bastoni." Tyrion raised brows. "House of the Twin Stallions. Gulltown hosts merchant stallions? True, but emblem of rampant pair." He pawed memory. "No Diarden, no runestone." Prendal shook head. "Golden Company once kept a second emblem, a pair of warhorses flanking an elephant, but never alone. Twin horses alone may mean Mirish sons." Grey Worm gripped spear. "My soldiers watch Gulltown docks." "My ship's ravens already fly," Sansa interjected. "Captain Serwyn may intercept any suspicious hull." Daenerys considered parchment, scrap. "Detowen. Our enemy hides behind foreign sigils and borrowed cloth. We will show them our face plainly. Tomorrow at dawn I ride to the aqueduct breach site and lay fresh foundation with my own hands. Let them strike while the realm watches." "You invite assassins," Grey Worm said. "I invite truth into daylight," she replied. Tyrion exhaled. He could see argument was fruitless. But he also saw steely calm, rather than rash pride in her stance. The queen he served now wielded risk like Smith with hammer. Measured blows, forging results. "We do it," he said. "But on our terms." "When wait you stall." Dawn broke pewter gray. Snow still spiraling but lighter. Crowds assembled by the aqueduct clearing. Word of royal visit already swirling like ash on wind once had. Daenerys arrived not by litter, but on Drogon's back. The dragon glided low, landed on a ridge of rubble, folded wings while steam puffed from nostrils to warm clusters of frostbitten onlookers. Dodrin squealed. Workers bowed, many still brandishing trowels and chisels. Tyrion, cloaked in layered furs, guided Sansa to a vantage point by a scaffolding tower. Grey Worm and 200 Fire Watch formed silent perimeter. Daenerys dismounted, lifted a stone. One of the first of new foundation, raised it overhead so all could see. "Stone by stone," she called. "Together." She set it into wet mortar. A mason hammered wooden wedge to seat it. Applause rippled, hands warming each other. She bent for a second stone. Above, on the unfinished arch, a figure appeared. Hooded in green, half-mask, glinting silver. Snow obscured his ascent until he stood almost over her head, arms outstretched holding a clay pot smoking from fuse. Prendal on the outer flank shouted warning. Too late. The pot left the assailant's grasp, tumbling end over end toward the base of the arch where queen and children alike stood. Drogon screamed. His wing beat blasted snow off rooftops. In a blink he lunged, caught the clay pot midair in jaws lined by bright furnaces. Teeth crushed earthenware. Black powder flashed harmlessly in alveoli of the dragon's throat, snuffing before ignition. The burst flared within Drogon's mouth. Smoke curling from his nostrils. He shook head and spat shards upon an empty patch of ground, where they thudded like pebbles. The masked assassin froze in sudden terror. Spears from 3 rooftops skewered the air. Grey Worm's men hurled with deadly practice. One piercing cloak, pinning villain to beam by sleeve. He wrenched, slipped free of arm, caught on rafter. Daenerys, who had scaled the opposite support moments earlier in stealth, swung on hemp line. She crashed feet first into the man's chest. They toppled across scaffolds, smashing through brittle boards until they landed in a snow-softened cart of hay below, Daenerys atop him, dagger at throat. Gasps turned to roaring cheers as Firewatch closed in. Tyrion's heart pounded. Daenerys still stood below arch, snow dusting her hair. She reached to soothe Drogon's snorting muzzle. Children hid faces behind her skirts, then peeked in awe. Sansa descended scaffold to join her, wrapping a spare cloak about the queen's shoulders. Daenerys dragged the assassin before them. Half-mask, knocked free, revealed not foreign sellsword, but a gaunt young man of maybe 20 winters, cheeks hollow, eyes aflame with fervor. His pinned cloak bore the twin stallions' brand crudely embroidered in white thread. "Name," Grey Worm demanded. The youth spat blood and words. "The torrent carries all to sea." Tyrion frowned. "House Torrent? A river knight lineage extinct generations. Or a code phrase?" Daenerys stepped forward, calm. "Who sent you?" The youth grinned a cracked grin. "The dead mother of ashes. And they outnumber the living." Enough riddles," Daenerys snapped, twisting his arm until he gasped. Sansa laid hand on Daenerys' shoulder. "Let the maester question him in privacy. He may know more alive." Crowds pressed. Soldiers corralled them back. Daenerys raised her hand. "No vengeance here. Only justice. Take him to the cells, tend his wounds." As the youth was hauled off, he began to sing, garbled Myrish sea shanty about bridled horses falling into storms. It faded as he descended into alley shadows. That night, the city thrummed with talk. Of Drogon's impossible catch, of Northern Queen shielding Dragon Queen with a cloak, of masked zealot conjuring ghosts of war, yet feeding dragons' jaws. The tale inflated with each telling, but its core solidified. The dragon guarded the people now. In turn, the people guarded their queen. In the solar, Daenerys and Sansa sat before a low hearth, damp cloaks steaming across chairbacks. Tyrion, Grey Worm, and Daenerys waited while Maester Walken arranged parchments on a side table. "He refuses proper name," Walken reported. "Says he is nobody." The Torrent's twist. "He bears scars of flogging on back older than 6 months, likely slave stripes from Mare or Lies. Curiously, left arm bears faint tattoo. Crossed keys, a mark used by Braavosi bankers to denote indenture forgone." Tyrion's brows rose. A sellsword once indebted to Iron Bank. "Possible," Walken said. "Or stolen identity. Ink is blurred." Daenerys paced. "Twin stallions, Torrent, Braavos keys. None align neatly." "They align in anonymity," Sansa murmured. She met Daenerys' eyes. "My Lord Father once said if you would strike the heart of kingdom, strike its memory. Make folk doubt their shared tales, and they fall upon each other. Someone wants to unravel the story of this city before it is fully woven." Daenerys nodded slowly. "Then we answer with truth louder than lies. Tomorrow the conclave will meet again, but not in market squares. We convene on the steps of the broken sept, the very place where faith crumbled. Let all see what stands in its stead." Grey Worm shifted. "Assassin may strike again." "Let him," Daenerys said. The word soft yet forged of tempered steel. "Each attempt rings the bell of solidarity louder." Tyrion exhaled, both proud and worried. "I shall draft a speech to preempt further rumors." She shook head. "Not speech. Song perhaps. Let the people sing what they live." She turned to Sansa. "You grew under Minstrel's Keep. Do you know ballads the realm shares?" Sansa's eyes lit with surprise. "I sang for my siblings once, when we were children." "Sing tomorrow," Daenerys said. "A northern song, then one from Stormlands, then I will teach one from the summer sea. We weave voices like threads. These conspirators will find no tug that unravels all." Sansa hesitated, then inclined head. "Very well. I recall one about a wolf who offered a dove his den when winter came." Tyrion smiled gently. "How apt." "And how?" At sunrise, the sept's skeletal steps thronged. Snow glittered on melted pillars now arrayed as benches. Priests and septas, wearing patched robes of 7 colors, guided refugees to seats near lords. Sellswords stood shoulder to shoulder with city watch. Daenerys arranged torches in wide circle. At the apex of steps, fragments of shattered bell lay beside scorched stones. A reminder none could ignore. Sansa stepped forward first, voice trembling only on the first note. Then steady as a harp. A song of high moors and winter wheat, of hungry wolves sharing last loaf with field mice, of dawn that smelled of lilac when spring broke. Her soprano drifted across ruin, echoed off walls still under repair. When she finished, silence hung, stunned. Then a mason from Flea Bottom raised a deep baritone to answer. The Storm's Bride, an old sea chanty. Before his chorus ended, a Dornish boy whistled counter-melody, cymbals of his timbre joining. Soon the entire crowd hummed, stamping cold-numbed boots for time. Daenerys closed her eyes, breathing rhythm into center of her chest. She began to chant in soft Valyrian, words older than every stone around them. Hymn of the Chainbreaker, taught by freedmen at Marine's pyramids. Her voice low, almost murmured, yet the crowd hushed to hear. She sang of hands unbound, of fields plowed by choice, of dragons that carried seeds rather than fire. The Valyrian syllables flowed into the common tongue as she translated phrases midline, until small folk could join. They did, surprising themselves, strange words becoming their own. On final note, Drogon roared from his perch, a lingering chord of bass that rattled ribs, but felt more like applause than menace. The people cheered back. Tyrion watched, throat tight. Here were lords who still harbored grudges, Sellswords who yesterday eyed riots, Northern guards who once swore never to kneel, and they sang in one breath. For a moment he saw a tapestry of colors unwoven from war. Gray Worm spoke under his breath, truth louder than lie. Davena smiled, eyes glassy. A hush reclaimed steps when Sansa raised her hand. She addressed assembly. Conclave concludes with these accords. She read roll of charters codifying grain routes, labor guild rights, rotational levy system requiring no forced conscription, council of peoples to include 2 elected smallfolk voices from every district. Deafening cheers followed each pledge. The Queen of North proclaimed sisterhood with Queen of Dragon. She would station ambassadors, not armies. In turn, Daenerys vowed dragons would never again breathe war on Westeros soil, save to defend it. The crowd roared Drogon's name. The dragon preened. Enterer. Winter thaw came in earnest weeks later. Ice broke along river piers. Barges arrived heavy with limestone from the arbor. In Mistford Quarter the first new schoolhouse opened. Children lined benches salvaged from noble ruins, reciting letters carved into slate boards donated by the Iron Bank under surprisingly generous terms. Tyrion negotiated with a visiting factor who approved of stable tax revenues. Sansa prepared to return north, but lingered days to walk marketplaces with Daenerys, face half hidden under hood as they sampled honeyed figs from Dorne and sweet sea snails from the stepstones. On their last stroll they found themselves beside the Iron Throne husk, now roped off awaiting removal to foundry. Spikes glinted in afternoon sun. Snowmelt dripped through open ceiling onto blades. Sansa studied twisted metal, remembering father's dread. Daenerys regarded it as one might regard an old skin shed. "Will you melt it?" Sansa asked. "I will bury it." Daenerys brushed fingertips across a broken pommel. "Let the roots of new counsel grow around its quiet bone." They walked away together. One spring's equinox dawned clear, gulls banking over pink stone newly scrubbed. The queens met one final time in the dragon pit, where crates of saplings ringed open vault mouth. Elm, birch, weirwood cuttings under sealed loam. Gift from the north. Grow stands so city children might know forests. Sansa spoke a blessing. May roots bind stronger than chains. Daenerys answered in high Valyrian, voice echoing under broken dome. Drogon knelt, wings making canopies of shade as Sansa mounted stepping block to stroke his jaw, a gesture unimaginable months earlier. He rumbled soft as distant thunder, yet remained still. Northern guards gaped. Sansa smiled sly. "Perhaps I will ask Queen Daenerys to send dragon eggs to Winterfell next winter. Our kennels grow dull. First teach your hounds to share," Daenerys teased. They embraced. Then Sansa departed under cheers, her rare laugh trailing down the causeway like silver bells. Tyrion found Daenerys alone that evening atop the aqueduct tower. Sea breeze ruffled her hair. Below, lamps dotted avenues, but not so many as to scorn starlight. He offered flagon of warmed wine. She accepted. "You will need new hands soon," she said. "One with unbroken knee for all these stairs. Knees grown resilient." He settled beside her on stone lip. "Besides, hand seldom outruns his queen." A faint smile. Thank you, Tyrion. He swirled wine. For what? For standing when I crawled. He stared into distance, where two lantern strings traced new bridge. You rose faster than any winged creature I've seen. Silence enfolded them, not awkward, but gentle. Like a cloak, late at dusk. Below, stevedores' shanties drifted up, mixing with soft clatter of quills from scribes finishing ledgers in lamplight. Somewhere a bell tinkled, a small one, cast from melted scrap of the great bell shattered that fateful day. Its note rang clear, carrying promise rather than dread. Daenerys leaned forward, elbows on knees. We will err again, you and I. Undoubtedly. When we do, promise to remind me of this night. Of singing steps, dragons roar, harmonizing. Neon. Tyrion regarded the wine's sheen. I promise. Though I may require bribery, arbor gold grows scarce. She nudged him with shoulder. He chuckled. Far overhead, Drogon's soared beneath half-moon, wings carving lazy arcs. His shadow glided over river, over half-finished bridge, over a city alive. In its wake lights flickered but did not extinguish. They danced, as though jubilant to be noticed by so grand a guardian. Tyrion cleared throat. A 5-hour tale, you said once. How far are we? She looked out across roofs. Tonight may mark hour 2. Ambitious. Necessary. She finished wine, set cup aside. The realm has centuries of hurt. We grant it hours to tell new stories. Then, let's ensure we keep listening. She rose, brushed frost from skirts, extended a hand. Come, my hand. Tomorrow dawn we plant the northern saplings. I would have you shovel beside me. My back protests already. It will forgive you. He took her hand, joints creaking. Together they walked down spiral stairs into warm torchlight, where the city's heartbeat echoed through stone. Behind them, Drogon roared once. A deep, rolling call, neither menace nor warning, but invitation, like thunder before rain that nourishes fields. Below, small folk settled in homes newly roofed. Sel's words counted honest coin. Lords planned seed planting rather than skirmish. Wind carried scents of saffron and pine tar, of sea salt and barley crusts. Fires crackled in hearths that owed their flames not to destruction, but to comfort. And under the waxing moonlight of a realm no longer at war with itself, Daenerys Targaryen and Tyrion Lannister stepped into darkness, lit by hope's quiet embers, intent on tending them, stone by stone, song by song, hour by careful hour, until the story of their unforgiving past gave way at last to the gentle vastness of tomorrow. The city's heartbeat quickened with spring. From the morning the saplings went into the earth, King's Landing grew alive with a new sort of restlessness. A current that pulled strangers together instead of setting them against each other. No part of the city was spared change. Even the slowest alleys found themselves swept and watered, their broken stones lifted away by the same hands that had once raised barricades or looted stores in the shadow of fire. Each act of mending grew the city's story, layering memory and hope in ways only the survivors could truly understand. Daenerys began to walk the streets without escort most mornings, always before the bells. She moved quietly, hair loose, boots simple, dress a sturdy blue. Sometimes a vendor would offer a shy nod or a child would slip her a blossom with trembling fingers. She responded with thanks, sometimes in Valyrian, sometimes in the thick accent of the riverfolk, and word spread until a myth of the barefoot queen wove itself through the markets and wharves. Even those who would never forgive her for fire found themselves watching her progress with uneasy respect. Each day brought new business. Davena Sand's Firewatch doubled in size as orphans and outcasts volunteered, drawn by the promise of food, shelter, and purpose. The new council, called by the small folk, the Stone Table, grew fractious as it should, and in that friction, Daenerys saw the hope of lasting peace. She never demanded silence. She encouraged debate, reminded her counselors that trust had to be hammered into shape, not wished into being. It was Tyrion who best managed the council's tempests, keeping tempers from breaking into vendettas. When a dispute flared between the tanners and the bricklayers, each blaming the other for fouled water, he let them air grievances until the truth surfaced. a collapsed aqueduct filter, easily fixed. The next week, the two guilds joined to throw a feast, the first of many such fusions. Grey worms, unsullied, kept their vigil, but it was a gentler one now. Patrols walked with helms off, always in pairs with firewatch or even sellsword auxiliaries, and sometimes they paused to help patch a roof or move a stalled cart. The city's mood shifted with the sight of these soldiers, kneeling to scrub a fountain or sharing bread with market beggars. Daenerys ordered old stocks and whipping posts pulled down, replaced with green beds for herbs, and over time even the most cynical corners of Flea Bottom softened. Just a little, at the memory of whips gone and food lines grown long but orderly. But not all was healed. Deep in the ruins, old wounds still wept. The masked conspirators, now openly calling themselves the Torrent, did not give up their campaign of fear, though their strikes grew desperate. At night, painted warnings appeared on walls. Twin stallions rearing above black waves, crude warnings that fire begets flood. Each time the signs appeared, firewatch squads wiped them clean by dawn. Once, a market cart was found sabotaged, axles split so that sacks of grain would tumble and spill. Another time, a lantern string snapped in the night, sending 2 men to the healers' tents. Each time, Daenerys answered not with fire, but with the same calm determination. The market cart repaired, the lanterns rehung, the wounded visited, and thanked for their courage. One evening, as purple dusk bled over the rooftops, Daenerys sat with Tyrion and Vivanna atop the new stone table. No carved throne, only benches and plain planks on barrels, beneath a canopy of birch branches. They ate hot bread, cheese, apples cut by Tyrion's knife. The bells of the city rang a simple hour, mellow and whole. "We have made the city less likely to eat itself," Tyrion said, chewing a bite of apple. "But that does not mean the rest of the realm will let it thrive untested." Vivanna reached for more bread. "Storm's End sends envoys next moon. The stepstones have seen Lysine galleys lurking. Gold buys many blades in lean years, and the torrent's reach may run deeper than we know." Daenerys watched a flicker of fireflies rise from a nearby herb garden. "Then let them come. The truth of our labor is not hidden. Every spy may eat from our pots. Every sailor may drink from our wells. The days of locked halls and secrets are over." Vivanna smiled, half wistful. "Your faith in people is bold." "It is the only power I claim now," Daenerys replied. And she meant it. If it fails, then all the fire and dragons in the world would not be enough. Tyrion poured them each a cup of pale wine, lifting his own. "To the stone table. May it outlast our tempers." They drank. Around them, Firewatch and Unsullied shared stew and stories, while a street minstrel played a gentle tune on a battered harp. Below, the city's light flickered from window to window, a constellation steadier than any sky. It was not long before the first test arrived. At sunrise, horns blared at the eastern gate, where the river road met the city's new bridge. Lady Barbary Dustin had come at the head of a column, 200 strong, northern spears flanked by exiled knights, with banners of red and black intertwined. Her retinue was the largest to arrive since Sansa's delegation, and her reputation as a fierce traditionalist preceded her. She wore black furs over a steel breastplate, her hair bound back in a severe plait. When she dismounted at the gate, she demanded audience with the council and the dragon. Tyrion greeted her with wary courtesy, while Davina's eyes never left Barbary's hands. Daenerys herself arrived at the gates, boots still muddy from a tour of the new granaries. She nodded greeting, then gestured Barbary and her captains through the gate. They walked in silence to the stone table, where the council waited. Barbary looked over the assembled, mason, merchant, healer, septa, as well as Firewatch and Unsullied, her eyes keen. "This is your court." Daenerys inclined her head. "This is the realm, Lady Barbary. No throne, only table." Barbary's mouth curled in what might have been approval or derision. "My lands have sent word of 100 refugees, your refugees, who cross our borders seeking food and shelter. My own stores run thin, yet your council levies tithe as if the spring were fat. Why must the north bear your city's wounds?" Daenerys listened, as always, before she answered. Because the city is not only mine, it is the realm's heart, and when it broke, all bled. But we send timber south, grain west, and coin east to every holding in need. If your people suffer, say so, and we will send what we can. Barbary narrowed her eyes. And if we do not wish to share? Daenerys leaned forward, voice mild. Then you will find your roads empty, your markets cold, your trade stalled by the silence of the city you scorn. No coin flows in drought. Barbary studied Daenerys and Tyrion, then Daenerys. You have learned the game, she said finally. But I will watch, and if your promises are lies, I will raise a storm the North has not seen in 100 years. Daenerys nodded. I hope for fair winds instead. Barbary departed with her captains, and the council exhaled as one. They will come again, Tyrion said. Some to threaten, some to beg, some to steal. If you are not careful, you will find yourself surrounded by more enemies than before. Or more friends, Daenerys said softly. If we remember that power is not in fear but in trust. The days that followed bore out her words. Envoys from the Reach, the Riverlands, and Dorne arrived in turn. Some openly skeptical, some hungry for alliance, all curious to see if the tales of the new King's Landing were true. Each was met not with feasts or pageantry, but with labor and laughter. City walks, soup in the markets, evenings at the stone table. The most skeptical, Lord Gunther Hightower, who arrived with a personal guard of 40, was witnessed sharing wine with a mason who had rebuilt his family's old wharf. Within a week, he offered funds to repair a broken lighthouse, his seal affixed to the stone table's charter. Yet the city's peace was fragile, and at the edges of the realm, the torrent grew bolder. A string of fires erupted along the Traders' Road, threatening not the city but the small towns feeding its granaries. Letters arrived in code, warning of plots to poison the city's wells or sabotage the grain fleet in the bay. Each threat was met with quiet resolve. Fire watch patrols tripled, grain ships loaded under the watchful eye of unsullied veterans, and Daenerys herself visited the threatened towns, speaking not as queen but as neighbor, asking for help and offering aid. The torrent struck hardest at a river village a day north of the city, where masked men set fire to the granaries and took 2 children hostage in the chaos. When the news reached the council, Daenerys rose immediately. Strapping on sword and cloak, "We will not answer violence with violence," she said to Grey Worm and Davina, who stood ready with arms. "We will answer with truth." Tyrion, at her side, pressed a hand to her arm. "Truth will not break a barricade or free hostages." "Perhaps not," Daenerys said. "But trust might." She rode north with a small escort. Tyrion, Davina, Grey Worm, and 3 fire watch captains. As they neared the burning village, a crowd gathered at the edge of the fields. Farmers, villagers, children, many weeping, some shouting for retribution. The Torrent's men had barricaded the granary, holding the 2 hostages, a boy and a girl, at spear point. Daenerys rode alone into the open, leaving her sword sheathed, hands open. The Torrent's leader, masked in river blue, emerged to meet her. "You come unarmed," he called. "I come to end this," Daenerys replied. "Release the children, and I promise you fair trial. Hold them, and the realm will judge you by your fear." The masked man laughed. "The realm? You mean this city of ashes? This council of beggars and sellswords? You are no queen." Daenerys shook her head. "No, not queen. Only one who chose to build rather than burn. Only one who believes that tomorrow can be better." "Zay." The villagers watched, breath held. The Torrent's men glanced among themselves, uncertainty plain even behind their masks. The leader hesitated. "You do not threaten?" "I do not," Daenerys said, her voice clear over the crackle of fire. "But if you choose blood, you will answer to the people, not to me." Slowly, the masked leader lowered his spear. The others followed. The hostages ran to Daenerys, and she knelt to embrace them, tears streaking her face. The villagers surged forward, but she raised a hand, holding them back. "These men will stand trial," she said. "Not for revenge, but for justice." That day, the village burned. But the people did not turn on one another. Instead, they gathered to rebuild, stone by stone, and the Torrance men, now unmasked, revealed as desperate sons of local families, stood trial before their neighbors, judged with mercy as well as memory. Most were sentenced to labor, rebuilding what they had destroyed. When Daenerys returned to the city, the tale traveled ahead of her. For the first time, torrent graffiti did not appear that night. The bells rang in the city not for death or warning, but to call all to the stone table for a feast of thanks. Spring deepened. Crocus and snowdrop dotted the parks where old mansions had once loomed. The city's first full council, composed of lords, guilds, and smallfolk alike, voted to build a great hall on the site of the melted throne, its roof to be made of glass and timber, so that the stars might always be seen, a reminder that even the rulers were watched by a greater witness. Tyrion oversaw the plans, careful that no dais was higher than the council benches. Daenerys found herself less a queen and more a caretaker, a listener, a healer. She spent afternoons with the orphans, teaching them words of both common and Valyrian, and with the aged, hearing tales of the city before her birth. She visited the Firewatch barracks and the healers' tents, always listening, always present. Sometimes, on evenings when the city was quiet and the air sweet with spring, she would climb the high steps of the half-ruined sept and sit with Tyrion, Davina, and Grey Worm, watching the lamplight ripple over the river. Drogon, growing older and calmer, would rest beside her, his massive head in her lap, as she sang him soft songs of the summer sea. Once, when a violent storm lashed the city and the river threatened to flood its banks, Daenerys led a chain of sandbag carriers from the waterfront to the markets. Her bare feet muddy, her hair plastered to her scalp. Tyrion followed, cursing the weather but working alongside her, and by morning the flood had been held at bay. The next day, children painted bright fish on the sandbags, and the city laughed at the memory. It was not a perfect peace. There were still quarrels, still hunger and pain, but it was a peace people built and chose each day. As the months turned and the city bloomed, Daenerys saw her reflection in every window and river, not as a conqueror, but as a part of the great work, a single thread in a tapestry. The first harvest after the long rebuilding was bountiful. The council called for a festival, music, food, and dance, spilling from every square and alley. At the feast, Tyrion stood on a table, wine in hand, and toasted, to mistakes and forgiveness, to stories begun anew. Davina led the Firewatch in a wild Dornish reel. Grey Worm danced awkwardly, to the delight of 100 children. Drogon, at the edge of the city, watched fireworks bloom and did not stir. At midnight, Daenerys climbed the tower above the stone table and looked out over the city. She saw lanterns drifting on the river, heard laughter and song, felt the promise of dawn. Tyrion joined her, silent, carrying 2 cups of spiced cider. She took one and raised it. To the city. He clinked her cup. To its people. They drank, and for a moment, the story of King's Landing, of Daenerys and Tyrion and the 1,000 hands that built and healed, felt as if it would last forever. A legend written not in fire or blood, but in light, laughter, and hope. Aki Einden. When the lanterns of the harvest festival finally guttered out, the city's pulse softened into a rare quiet. Summer's first heat settled on the river gate and the rooftops, thick with jasmine and bread scents, and the faint metallic tang of clean water trickling in newly laid pipes. In those weeks the peace held, fragile but persistent, much like a cut healing without a scab. Markets reopened with more stalls than before the fire, and the Guildhall bells sang out new shifts at dawn and dusk, measuring time not in battles or funerals but in work and bread and gentle laughter. The great glass-roofed council hall rose rapidly at the heart of the city. Each day, masons and glaziers hoisted green and amber panes into the rafters, while Firewatch and Unsullied patrolled the scaffolds, not as wardens, but as fellow laborers. Daenerys watched the structure rise from mud and blackened stone, smiling to herself as children ran through its shadow and grown men paused to test the strength of new beams with their weight. No statue of the Dragon Queen was commissioned for its portico, no tapestry of her triumphs. Instead, Daenerys approved a single stone bench just within the doors, engraved with the names of every orphan who had lifted brick, or swept sawdust during the construction. A living roll of the city's heart. It was in that hall, under panes of sun-splintered color, that the city's true business unfolded. The council benches, worn smooth by hundreds of hands, grew crowded with voices: potters, smiths, brewers, healers and sailors, septas and patched habits, old soldiers missing fingers or eyes. Lords and ladies came too, their silks subdued among the rougher tunics, and learned quickly that to speak for one's house meant listening first to those who had fed, housed, and sheltered their own. Tyrion presided with a patient, wry humor, gaveling disputes down to the marrow, refusing to allow old feuds to shadow new laws. He kept his ledgers open and his wine watered, the better to last through endless hours of testimony and debate. Daenerys became less a ruler than a living emblem. She sat among the council only when invited, but more often she could be found wandering the city, sleeves rolled up, cheeks sunburned, lending her shoulder to a wagon or her tongue to a scolded child. In the evening, she walked the city walls with Grey Worm or Devavana, or simply sat in the long gardens above the riverside, watching flocks of geese settle. Drogon was less a terror now than a myth. On hot afternoons he slept coiled beneath the old dragon pit, venting heat through open jaws while brave children dared to creep close and watch his sides rise and fall. But the world outside King's Landing was never idle for long. The first sign came with a battered rider at dawn, his horse streaked with foam and his cloak in tatters. He had come from Tumbleton in the Reach, bearing a letter sealed in dark green wax. Tyrion broke it open beneath the council's glass dome while Daenerys poured him watered ale, the city's assembly watching in taut silence. To the Council of King's Landing, Tyrion read aloud. This dawn the black eel of Tumbleton calls for aid. A sickness rides the water. People die by the score. Our wells have turned sour. Our children cough blood. I have sent to Old Town, but their healers will not come unless coin is paid in full. If you claim to rule the heart, show your mercy to our wounded arms. In hope, not trust, Lord Mervyn Flowers. Messial. The news rippled through the benches. Septa Della rose at once, her thin hands trembling. I have cousins in Tumbleton. If it is the bloody flux, there is little that can be done. Yet we must try. A potter named Bormund, his hands cracked and scarred, shook his head. If it's their wells, then it's a trickle downstream from us. What blights them could blight us before midsummer. Nan? Tyrion looked to Daenerys, who had not sat but remained standing, fists clenched. We will send healers, masons, clean water, and every cart we can spare. But we must learn if this is the flux or something darker. A council of volunteers formed, healers led by Septa Della, Firewatch for protection, and 2 master masons. Devavana Sand volunteered as their captain, eyes sharp. I grew up where fever walks the gutters. We'll take what knowledge we've gathered here and make it work there, if the gods will it. Memonai. Tyrion insisted on sending his own apprentice, a young woman named Rella, whose head for sums had saved a dozen market accounts that spring. She'll keep count and send us word of what's needed. That afternoon, Daenerys visited the dragon pit where Drogon slept, and knelt beside his massive head. I cannot bring you, old friend, she whispered. The people are not ready for that shadow. Drogon snorted, his golden eyes blinking slow ascent, and Daenerys rested her hand on his brow, feeling the low, thunderous purr that vibrated through the ancient stone. As the relief column rode out, the city watched and whispered. Some feared the sickness would return with them. Others sent prayers or small offerings. Bundles of dried mint, cut ribbons, even silver coppers dropped into the Firewatch helmets. The council drafted new rules for washing and water, and a dozen lanterns burned through the night atop the city's wells, watched by children in shifts. Reports came back slow and uncertain. Devana's first letter was short: wells are fouled. Sickness is swift. The black eel is dead. The second was grimmer still. 2 Firewatch fallen, 1 mason delirious, but the council's remedies had slowed the deaths. Rella sent lists. Clean water holds. Bread riots averted. Old Town refuses aid. Tyrion pressed the city's coin stores into sacks and sent them south by river, and Daenerys herself wrote to the citadel, and to Sansa Stark, asking for help. It was Sansa's reply that broke the deadlock, a column of northern healers and wildlings immune to the flux, arriving a fortnight later, their sleds laden with herbs unknown south of the Neck. The flux broke within days of their arrival, and with it, the city's dread. Daenerys welcomed the survivors back at the river gate, embracing Daenerys and Rella before the cheering crowd. That summer, the legend of King's Landing as a city that cared spread farther than any queen's decree could travel. The Black Eel's kin sent barrels of cider and a carved sign. When the city bled, the city healed. The sign was nailed to the council hall's southern door, and every traveler entering read it. But not all travelers came with thanks. The same summer, a Lycian galley anchored in the bay, its captain a man named Coro Valentin, with skin like polished walnut and eyes green as broken glass. He claimed to carry wine and silk for trade, but Tyrion's spies noted the armed men in his hold and the sigils on their sleeves. Two stallions rampant, torrent colors. Daenerys did not wait for threat to breed. She called Coro to council, inviting him into the glass hall at midday, with every bench filled and Drogon sunning himself in plain view on the parapet above. The Lycian captain came cloaked in purple, smiling behind his beard, and bowed with the soft, practiced grace of a courtier. "Your city is changed, Queen Daenerys," Coro said, eyes flicking to every face at the council table. "You build with honest hands, they say. You share bread and water. But I wonder, will you share your peace?" Daenerys met his gaze, unblinking. "We share what is earned. We buy what is for sale. But we will not barter fear for freedom." Coro smiled, a tight curl at the edge of his mouth. A bold city has many enemies, and many more friends who will sell her to those enemies if gold is heavy enough. Tyrion leaned forward, voice soft but cold. "Careful, Captain. Your coin spends well in our city, but your threats will find no buyers here." "Then no." Daenerys and Grey Worm flanked Daenerys, their expressions unreadable. The benches behind held lords, farmers, and tradesmen in equal measure, every hand resting quietly, but not far from the tools or blades that had built and defended this city. Coro bowed again, not quite mocking. "We are all friends here. I have wares to sell, but also news. In Myr, in Lyce, in the free cities, rumors rise of a queen who has turned away from conquest. They say your enemies are gathering, ready to test the strength of your council's glass walls." "Nan." Daenerys lifted her chin. "Let them come and see. We do not fear sunlight, nor do we hide from darkness. You may trade your wares and take your news, but remember, this city guards its own, now and forever." The Lycian bowed low, withdrawing. That night, his ship slipped from the bay, leaving behind whispers, but no clear proof of threat. Tyrion ordered the harbor patrols doubled, and Daenerys sent ravens to the Stormlands and the Reach, warning of ships with torrent colors. The next threat was not war but fire. 2 nights later, flames leapt from the city's oldest granary, set by a masked figure who fled into the chaos. The fire watch arrived too late to save the stores, but Daenerys appeared within the hour, soot on her face, and promised new bread before sunset. By noon, every oven in the city was working double, and within a week, not a mouth had gone hungry. With every test, the city grew more itself, quick to rally, slow to fear, stubborn in defense of its weakest. And with every day, the legend of Daenerys grew, not as a breaker of chains, but as a builder of bonds. When autumn ripened the city's parks and the harvest came in, the council called another festival. This time, the tables stretched for half a mile, loaded with fruit, nuts, roasted meats, and endless bread. The guilds sang, the lords danced with the small folk, and the night sky burned with fireworks set off from the repaired bridge. At the height of the revel, Daenerys climbed the steps of the council hall and called for silence. Her hair was loose, her gown plain, her eyes bright with tears. "This city is not the work of dragons or queens," she said. "It is the work of every hand, every voice, every hope carried through fire and loss. I am not your ruler. I am your neighbor, your friend, your fellow builder. Let us remember the past, but let us not live within it. Let us live for each other and for tomorrow." The cheers rang out, rolling over rooftops and echoing down the river. Tyrion lifted his cup to her, a smile broad and free. Daenerys grinned, her hands sticky with cider. Grey Worm nodded, silent as ever, but the corners of his mouth bent up in pride. That night, as the city slept, Daenerys stood alone at the riverside, watching the water's endless dark. Drogon rumbled beside her, wings rustling. She reached to stroke his scales and murmured thanks, both for the city and for the dragon's watchful patience. In the distance, lanterns winked out, one by one, until only the stars remained above the glass hall. Daenerys whispered a promise to them. Not to rule but to serve. Not to conquer, but to mend. Behind her, the city dreamed on, its wounds not gone, but healing day by day, hand by hand, story by story, into the only peace that endures, the peace the people make for themselves. Ilna. Winter's promise drifted on a cold breeze, as Daenerys walked the long parapet above King's Landing, eyes sweeping the skyline's unfamiliar quiet. She wore a heavy wool cloak, its hem stained from river mud and morning frost, and her hair had grown thick again, silver falling past her shoulders, a wild thing in the wind. The city below was still. Only a few bakers stirring their ovens, a trio of firewatch hurrying with lanterns, smoke rising from repaired chimneys and pale ribbons. It was nearly a year since the bells last tolled in dread, and in that year, every season had brought its own challenge. Fire, flood, sickness, the old hatred that flickered up like embers each time rumor or want set neighbor against neighbor. Yet every time, the city answered in kind, not with rage or flight, but with labor and resolve. The festival's tables were still stored in the council hall. The memory of bread shared in the square outlasted even the scent of it. In the stories that rose each night in the inns, Daenerys was not the Dragon Queen, or the breaker of chains, but the barefoot queen, who walked the alleys, who sweated in the sun, and sang with the children. She paused, looking west where the new glass hall rose, a cathedral to sunlight and the will of the people, its windows painted with stories. The first healing, the council's first debate, the night Drogon ringed the city with fire to keep out the cold. Inside, by the glow of candles, Tyrion drafted letters to the north and riverlands. Daenerys drilled new firewatch recruits in the shadow of the wall. The old order's ghosts drifted through the corridors, but their voices grew fainter with every council held, every judgment delivered by small folk and noble alike. In the late autumn of that first peaceful year, change arrived with the wind from Old Town. A delegation of archmaesters and lords, trailing clerks and septas and the sour-faced new high septon, come not in anger but in weariness. They sought proof of the city's order, of the realm's stability, of Daenerys' intentions. It was a test, subtler than armies, but no less dangerous. The council hall rang with voices on the day they arrived. Tyrion presided with extra care, his wit sharper than usual, while Daenerys listened more than she spoke. The archmaesters asked for ledgers, for lists of dead and living, for proof of the city's food stores and water tables. The lords wanted surety of roads and riverways, rights to their old incomes, a guarantee that the new council's rule would not spill north or south beyond its walls. Daenerys answered each with patience. She brought the archmaesters to the city's hospitals, let them question the healers and the sick. She walked with the lords through the markets, showed them the schools and the clean wells. She offered bread and water at every stop, shared stories of each festival and riot, never hiding the cost of her city's peace. But the High Septon was not so easily convinced. One cold morning, in the half-rebuilt sept, he demanded Daenerys kneel before the Seven and confess her sins for the city's burning. The city's folk watched, silent, wary, some with resentment, some with hope. Daenerys answered, voice strong and steady, I have confessed to the city, and I confess to you. What I destroyed, I have spent every waking hour rebuilding. The gods know my heart, and my neighbors know my work. If you seek atonement, look to their judgment, not to mine alone. The High Septon, face pale, turned away. But the septas who traveled with him wept openly, and 2 stayed behind, joining the city's healers. After a fortnight, the delegation left, their letters and reports full of grudging respect and quiet wonder. Tyrion, relieved, celebrated with rare arbor gold in the garden, laughing as Davina tried and failed to teach Rella a Bravosi dance. As the cold deepened, the city's rhythm changed. The Firewatch lit braziers on every corner. The council ordered extra bread and coal for the poorest quarters. Daenerys worked beside the masons, patching leaks and helping roofless families move into empty towers abandoned during the war. When a winter fever swept the city, she sat with the sick, brought honey water and hope. No one died alone, and when the fever passed, the city's bells rang in joy rather than fear. Snow dusted the city by late frost moon, and the parks and gardens glimmered beneath the pale sky. Daenerys and Tyrion, cloaked and shivering, walked to the banks of the river, watching the children slide down the snowy embankments on planks of wood, their laughter peeling over the ice. In the council hall, winter brought new disputes. The lords of the Riverlands asked for more grain than their levies allowed. The guilds quarreled over tariffs for the northern roads. The city's septus debated whether the new orphanage should teach letters in the old tongue or the new. Tyrion balanced the disputes with a weary wisdom, always urging compromise, never letting bitterness set root. But beyond the city, unrest grew. Word came of bandits in the southern marches, dispossessed knights, and old Lannister men turned raider. The torrent reappeared in the Riverlands, burning small towns and leaving painted warnings. In the north, Queen Sansa wrote of skirmishes with free riders and rumors that exiled noblemen sought the aid of foreign sellswords. Daenerys called council in the glass hall, inviting every voice that wished to speak. She listened as the Firewatch captains argued for a show of force, as Tyrion urged caution, as the Masons worried over lost sons, and the healers worried over more wounded than they could treat. "We do not answer fire with fire," Daenerys said at last. "If we send armies, we become what we once feared. If we ignore these wounds, they will fester and rot the peace we built." Grey Worm, who had become something quieter than a soldier, and something stronger than a sentinel, spoke for the first time. "Send me, and a handful. We do not fight unless forced. We go to sea, to remind them of what this city has become. We return with truth." So Daenerys sent a small band, Grey Worm, Davina, Rella, a half-dozen Firewatch, and 2 old knights sworn to peace. They traveled the Riverlands in winter, speaking to lords and small folk, sitting with the wounded, offering what aid they could. They found famine and sickness, fear and anger, but also hope. In every town where they lingered, the old banners faded, and the news story spread. That a city once feared had learned to heal, that peace was possible, even after such ruin. It was in the ruined hall of Harrenhal that Grey Worm met the leader of the Torrent face to face. A gaunt, scarred man with the haunted eyes of one who had lost everything to fire. They spoke long into the night, and in the morning, Grey Worm sent a raven to Daenerys. "There is pain here, deeper than the rivers. They do not seek war, but recognition. They want to be heard, to know that their dead are not forgotten." And Daenerys called a council and read Grey Worm's words aloud. The city's benches argued into the night, but in the end, they agreed to send more aid. Grain, tools, healers, and to invite the river lords and even the Torrent's leaders to a winter council in King's Landing. As the roads cleared and the thaw began, those invitations were accepted. For the first time since the city burned, the river lords and Torrent banners hung in the same hall as the lords of the Crownlands and the northern stewards. The air was thick with suspicion and sorrow, but Daenerys welcomed each delegation, sharing her table, breaking bread and pouring wine with her own hand. In the debates that followed, old wounds bled openly. The Riverlord spoke of betrayal, of lives and homes lost to fire. The Torrent's delegates, faces masked in black cloth, spoke of vengeance, but also of longing for peace. Tyrion managed the storm, redirecting anger into confession, urging those present to look beyond blame. At the end of the week, after endless speeches and bitter tears, Daenerys stood and spoke. "There is no forgiveness without memory," she said. "We will remember every lost child, every burned field, every broken oath. We will not forget, but neither will we be ruled by pain. Here, in this hall, we begin again, not as conqueror and conquered, not as river or city, but as people who have seen too much death. She ordered that the names of the dead be carved into a wall of the glass hall, and that each spring, a festival of lanterns be held for the lost. She offered the Torrens children seats in the city's schools, their sick in the city's hospitals, and a place at the stone table for any willing to serve in peace. The decision was not without anger. Some lords stormed out. Some Torrent delegates wept openly, but most stayed. The first charter was signed, a peace not of submission, but of mutual recognition, and an agreement to send news and delegates to the council each season. When the last day of winter faded, Daenerys and Tyrion sat alone in the council hall, watching the lanterns flicker through the colored glass. The benches were empty, but the echo of voices remained, a tapestry of hope and grief. "Do you think it will hold?" Tyrion asked, voice soft, exhaustion deep in his bones. "I do not know," Daenerys replied. "But we will keep trying. That is all peace is, the trying." He raised his cup to her, and she to him, and for a long while they sat in silence, letting the city's heartbeat settle around them. Spring came with a rush of warmth, melting the last snows from the Red Keep's gardens. The parks were replanted. The glass hall gleamed in the sun, and the bells of King's Landing rang out, calling the people to a festival of remembrance. Lanterns drifted on the river at dusk, each one bearing a name or a prayer. Children danced, musicians played, and the city's wounds ached but did not bleed. In the seasons that followed, Daenerys' legend changed again. She was no longer the Dragon Queen or the Barefoot Queen, but simply Daenerys of the Stone Table, remembered for her patience, her stubborn hope, and the city she had taught to mend. When she walked the parapets at dawn, the city woke with her. When she slept, the city watched over her, every light in every window a silent promise that peace would be guarded, not by fear, but by love. Drogon, his wings graying with age, circled the city rarely now. But when he did, the people waved from rooftops and children shouted their greetings. Tyrion remained by her side, growing older, grayer, but never less sharp. Daenerys became captain of the Firewatch, training every child who wished to serve. Grey Worm retired to the gardens, teaching the orphans to grow food, his quiet presence as steadfast as stone. Years would pass, and the world would change again, but the story of Daenerys, Tyrion, and the city they rebuilt would be told each winter, over bread, over fire, in song and in silence. And with every telling, the light of that fragile peace would shine a little brighter, until even the old wounds learned, if not to heal, at least to close gently in the warmth of hope. Enne ka ni end sao. Another spring and summer followed, and the city stretched itself awake, sloughing off winter's weight with the shouts of river boys and the racket of building. The new hall's glass roof caught dawn's gold, and set it dancing over the council tables, illuminating the faces of 100 free men and women, each one with a vote, each one an owner of the city's fate. Even those who had entered the hall wary, who had clung to the old feuds and ancient pride, now found themselves drawn into the messy, relentless business of living. The small bargains, the daily forgiveness, the fierce insistence that no quarrel was worth more than bread or a warm fire at night. The children who had watched Daenerys walk the markets were older now, many apprenticed to trades or training with the Firewatch. At first they mimicked their elders, bickering over scraps or daring one another to mischief. But the older boys and girls who remembered the old hunger kept order, passing down rules like games. No one eats until all are served. No one is left behind at dusk. The council saw this, smiled, and ordered every orphan a proper pair of boots, paid from the grain tithes that had once been hoarded for lords. The river flowed stronger each month, swollen with spring melt and trade from upriver towns that had sent bitter words, but now sent barges as well, timber and wool, onions and cider, even the first salmon of the year, fat and silver. In return, King's Landing's bakers loaded the holds with brown bread and jars of honey, and the healers pressed pouches of dried mint and willow bark into the hands of every boatman. Daenerys made the journey up the river twice that summer. She traveled not by royal barge but on a battered fishing boat, its oarsman a wiry man named Pole, who talked to his boat like a wife and swore at the weather like a priest. With her went Rella, who now managed the council's books, and 3 firewatch guards, one of them barely taller than his spear, all of them proud of their patched red cloaks. They stopped at every town and dock, greeting farmers and fishermen, sitting in tap rooms to listen to disputes and laughter alike. Some folk looked on her with suspicion, remembering dragons and burning, but most saw the boots and the rough hands and the way she listened, and found their anger sliding away like mud off a rock. In the largest town, Harrow's End, the elders called a gathering. The main hall was hung with riverweed and dried flowers, the air thick with the scent of yeast and boiled onions. The debate was honest and sometimes sharp. Why should the city get the best of the fish? What was done about thieves along the banks? When would Daenerys build the promised granary to shelter them through next winter? She answered every question, never promising what she could not give, always pressing the need for patience and partnership. One old woman, hair white as river foam, spoke last. "We lost sons and daughters to the fire and the fever," she said. "We don't forget. But when my house burned, it was your council sent lumber and saws. My grandson works in the city now, and he sends home his pay. So I say let the past be remembered, but let the bread be shared." None. That night, Daenerys and Rella slept on the floor of the meeting hall, listening to the snores of the elders and the rain ticking on the roof. In the morning, before the council, Daenerys knelt and helped sweep the ashes from the old fire pit, her sleeves gray, her hands steady. When they returned to the city, Pole the oarsman spread word of her visit along every dock. The story changed in the telling. Some claimed she had rowed the boat herself, others that she healed a sick child with a touch. But the truth held. The queen was no longer distant or feared, but as much a part of the river's life as any waterman. Tyrion met her on the quay, grinning and squinting against the sun. "You've a knack for these pilgrimages," he said. "Perhaps you'll be remembered as Daenerys the Ferried, rather than Daenerys the Dragon." She laughed and tossed him a jar of pickled onions. "A fair trade for your last speech on river tariffs." He winced. "May the gods forgive you for listening to a word of it. The only thing duller than tariffs is the wine I had to drink to survive it." They walked together up through the crowded streets, past flower sellers and street dancers, and the smoke of roasting pork. At the new hall, they found Daenerys pacing, her arms full of papers. "3 disputes," Daenerys announced. "One over a shipment of spoiled apples, one over the ferry fees, and one over a girl who claims a boy stole her goat and dyed it blue." Tyrion looked skyward. "May the 7 grant me the wisdom to judge goats and boys." Daenerys grinned, rolling up her sleeves. "Let's begin with the apples." In the weeks that followed, the council grew ever busier. The first formal schools opened in the heart of the city, staffed by septas, healers, and a brave OC who had once counted coins for the Iron Bank. The curriculum included letters, numbers, songs, and the practical work of peace, conflict resolution, city law, the histories of every land in Westeros. The orphans took to these lessons with hungry minds, and soon the small folk, who had once scorned learning, sent their own children as well. In the markets, Daenerys sat often with the vendors, learning the secrets of bread and cheese. The bargains struck in whispers and with winks. When thieves were caught, she asked not for hands, but for reason. Why they stole, who was hungry. Most often the answer was want, not wickedness, and she ordered extra bread sent to the hungriest corners, along with a stern warning that the city would not tolerate greed. One night in high summer, as storms raged across the bay and thunder rolled over the rooftops, a stranger arrived at the city gates. He was tall and ragged, with a cloak patched from many colors, and a silver chain hung about his neck. He claimed to be a wandering maester, come to see the city that would not die. Daenerys and the Firewatch questioned him for an hour, but he answered each probe with patience and a dry wit that soon won their grudging respect. He was given a cot in the healer's hall and spent his first day tending to the sick and wounded, his second tutoring the youngest orphans in the art of letters. On the third day, He attended the council, watching as Tyrion mediated a heated dispute over dock tariffs. At the end, he stood and spoke, his voice carrying across the benches. "I have seen in every corner of this land," he said. "I have seen towns burned and rebuilt, villages starved and then fed, lords who failed and lords who learned. What you build here is not perfect. There is still want, still anger, still old wounds. But there's also hope. In every street, in every story, in every quarrel and embrace, I see the bones of a city that might last. Not because of any queen or council, but because of the people who choose each day to stay." Then Torsh. He stayed on, never taking more than bread and a pallet in the healer's hall, and in time became known as the White Maester. His letters, sent to Old Town and beyond, spread the city's new reputation as a place where strangers were welcomed, not feared. But not all who heard the White Maester's tales wished the city well. In the free cities, mercenaries and broken lords brooded over old losses, plotting to reclaim what they could. In the north, a hard winter sent bands of desperate men south, seeking food and shelter. In the hills to the east, a minor lord raised the banner of the torrent once more, gathering exiles and promising to retake the city by force. Word reached the council by way of traders and ravens, and for the first time in years, fear crept into the city's heart. The fire watch drilled harder, and the walls were checked and mended by every able hand. Tyrion urged caution. "Let the world see our resolve, but not our panic," while Davina urged readiness, drilling the orphans and small folk who wished to defend their homes. Daenerys listened to all, then went herself to the eastern hills. She took only Grey Worm, Rella, and a dozen firewatch, each sworn not to raise a weapon unless attacked. They rode out at dawn, reached the rebel camp by midday, and found the torrent's banner flying over a ragged assembly of men and women, some gaunt with hunger, others fierce with anger and pride. Daenerys entered their camp alone. She walked unarmed, her cloak plain, her hair wind-blown, and stopped before the rebel leader, a woman young and sharp-eyed, scar on her chin and a sword at her side. The two stood face to face, neither speaking at first. At last, Daenerys spoke. "Why do you rise against us?" The woman spat in the dirt. "Because my mother died in the fire. Because my brother died of hunger, and no council in the city fed him." Daenerys nodded, accepting the words as true. "And if I offer you bread, a voice at the stone table, a bed for every one of your folk who wishes peace, will you lay down your sword?" The woman stared hard, uncertain. "And if I refuse, then I will still feed your people, if they are hungry. But I will defend the city. No more burning, not from me, not from you." There was a long silence. Then, without another word, the woman threw her sword at Daenerys' feet. "I want my sister's children to eat." Daenerys picked up the sword and handed it back, hilt first. "Then come home." That night, the rebel camp joined the city's outer villages, sharing soup and stories with those who had once called them enemy. In the morning, the torrent banner was lowered, and its cloth used to patch the roof of the orphanage. The world watched all this with disbelief, then with envy. The free cities sent more traders than spies. Even Old Town's maesters, once skeptical, sent more healers and books. The North sent barrels of salt pork and wild honey, and Sansa herself wrote a letter, congratulating Daenerys. "You have done what fire and sword never could. You have taught the city to hope." Then autumn came, gentle and slow. The first frosts dusted the glass hall, and the river ran clear and cold. Children played in the fallen leaves. The harvest was rich, and no one went hungry. The council's benches grew more crowded, the disputes more complicated, but the laughter and the songs lasted long after the lamps went out. On the eve of the winter festival, Daenerys stood at the edge of the river, lantern in hand. Tyrion, Grey Worm, Davina, Rella, and the White Maester gathered with her, each holding a lantern of their own. All along the banks, hundreds of lights waited. At her signal, the lanterns were set afloat, carrying prayers and wishes into the night. The river shone gold and red and green, and the whole city stood watching, silent but for the sound of water and wind. When all the lanterns were gone, Daenerys turned to her friends and smiled. A smile touched with loss, but also with peace. "We are none of us what we were," she said. "But we are together. That is enough." As the city settled into darkness, the river carried the lanterns out to sea, and the story of Daenerys and her people sailed on. An endless promise, glowing in the night, that even in a world forged by fire, there could be mending, and there could be light. Winter pressed steadily down on King's Landing, cloaking the city in silence and the kind of deep cold that set even the bells to muttering. The glass roof of the council hall gathered frost that melted into rivulets by midday, then refroze each night, so that sunlight always dappled the benches in 1,000 shifting patterns. The markets shrank, but never vanished, braziers glowing between stalls, barrels of salt fish and turnips laid open, woolens and furs for barter. The stone squares rang less with shouting, more with singing, and though the river ran sluggish and gray, it never froze. Fires burned in every quarter. The city, once devoured by flame, had learned at last to treasure warmth. Daenerys woke each day before the first bell. She did not sleep in palaces or towers, but in the old healer's house by the river, where windows fogged and pipes creaked and children ran wild between lessons. Some of the orphans she remembered as infants now had children of their own, and the youngest never tired of hearing stories, of dragons, of the city's burning, of the day the stones wept. She answered every question with candor and patience, and if sorrow edged her tales, it never overshadowed the gentle pride in her voice. She spent her mornings in the council hall. The benches were crowded with bundled forms, guildmasters, market wives, young firewatch eager to earn their seat, the old lords of crownlands, and more faces from the river and hill towns. Disputes in winter were smaller, but no less fierce. Whose ox had trampled the barley stored under the bridge? How should the city store fuel for the poor, now that the outer forests belonged equally to town and farm? Had the salt shipments from the north been weighed fairly, or had the scales tipped in the city's favor? Tyrion presided, grayer, slower, but undiminished. His laughter, sometimes dry, sometimes sharp, always cut tension, and his memory for old promises and sly bargains never failed him. Daenerys watched him with a fondness that startled her sometimes, the way one grows fond of a hearth kept for years. Not always cheerful, but always there and always needed. Grey Worm, too, had grown older in peace. He served now as the city's guardian in more than name, a teacher, a builder, the first to calm an angry crowd or break a fistfight before it soured into vengeance. The youngest orphans loved him best. His patience was inexhaustible, and he could be coaxed into a smile that made every fear seem small. Daenerys' firewatch was a force all its own. The children she had trained now led patrols from the slums to the merchant gates, and no council ever met without a firewatch captain at the table. That winter, the White Maester organized a census, the first since the war. For weeks, the city hummed with counting and questions, quills scratching late into the night. When the tallies were read in the glass hall, it was discovered the city had grown larger than before the fire. Refugees from the Reach and Riverlands, freedmen from across the narrow sea, old enemies and new kin. Somehow all had found a place. The results were read aloud on the first day of the year, as the city feasted on root pie and candied nuts. "We are more than we were," the White Master said, "and less than we could be." It was Daenerys who laughed and added, "That's all the hope a city needs." But hope in winter could turn thin as broth. That year, the snow fell hard. The high passes to the north closed. Wagons from the Reach slowed, and then stopped, and the stores of barley and apples grew tight. For the first time in years, the city's bellies growled. In the poorest quarter, old wounds flared, fights over bread lines, thefts in the night. Some muttered of dragons and doom. At council, tempers flared. A merchant's guildmaster accused the river folk of hoarding. The river folk replied in fury, pointing to their empty nets. The lords of the crownlands demanded the council levy new taxes on trade. Tyrion, trying to reason with all sides, found his words falling on deaf ears. Daenerys saw the fear mounting, heard the old resentments sharpening like knives. She called for open council, inviting every citizen who wished to speak, no matter how humble. The hall filled to bursting, apprentices, widows, boatmen, children, all crowding in from the cold. She stood at the center, her cloak plain, her boots worn. There is hunger, yes, and there is fear, but we are not the city we once were. We do not turn on each other. We share what we have, we name what we lack, and together we endure. Now, some grumbled, but others nodded. She asked the butchers to have their profits for a moon's turn. She asked the healers to tend the sick without payment. She asked the guilds to take on twice as many apprentices as usual, even if just for the winter. She asked the lords to give up their private cellars for the city's needies. Then she stood silent, waiting, as the cold seeped through the cracks and the lamp sputtered. The first to step forward was Bormund the potter, now old and bent. "My sons eat because of the council's bread. I will make cups for every child, for nothing but their song." A healer offered her stores of dried herbs. The river folk pledged an extra catch, even if it meant longer nights on the water. Slowly, the hall filled with promises, some small, some grand. The crowd thinned as people left to keep them. Still, there were days that tested hope. The snow deepened, ice thickened on the river, and for a week, no bread at all was baked. Daenerys worked side by side with the bakers, hauling sacks of grain, stoking ovens, carrying loaves to the freezing lines outside. Her hands grew raw, her nails broke, but she kept at it, singing with the children, laughing with the elders, telling stories to pass the hour. On the darkest night of winter, the river cracked and a wagon broke through the ice. 3 firewatch leaped in after, saving the driver and the cargo, barrels of salt pork and dried beans. They dragged the supplies to the shore, and the people who watched did not cheer, but set to hauling the barrels up the hill to the kitchens, not stopping until the last sack was saved. That night, Daenerys stood on the steps of the glass hall, face smudged with ashen flour, and spoke to the crowd. "Tonight, we have proven that even the cold cannot conquer us. The city is not walls or thrones, but the hands that build and feed and warm it." The hunger eased, slowly. Spring returned, the river thawed, and barges arrived heavy with fruit and cheese, wine and grain. The city erupted into song. The bakeries overflowed, the parks bloomed, and the orphans raced through the markets, their laughter brighter for the memory of want. When summer came, Tyrion declared a festival of gratitude. The council hall was thrown open, every table laden, every song sung. The White Maester read the census aloud once more. "We are more than we were, and growing still." Daenerys' firewatch paraded through the streets, not with weapons but with ribbons and flowers, tossing them to the crowds. Daenerys, her hair plaited with wildflowers, danced in the square with Grey Worm, Rella, Davena, and 100 children. When she tired, she sat beneath a blossoming apple tree and watched the city spin around her, dizzy with joy. Drogon, grown slow and lazy with age, dozed on the hill above, his wings shading the gardens. The world beyond King's Landing was quieter too. News came of peace in the Riverlands, of trade with Braavos and the Free Cities, of the North's bountiful harvest and Dorne's new vineyards. The old lords who had plotted in the shadows now sent their heirs to learn at the city's schools, or serve in the Firewatch. Even the Torrent faded, its banners lost or repurposed, its last leaders joining the council under new names. That autumn, a letter arrived from Sansa Stark. "Sister," she wrote, "the snows will come again, but I see in your city a hope I once thought lost to us all. May we meet again before the year turns." And so Sansa came, her retinue simple, her smile warmer than the northern sun. She walked the parks with Daenerys, sat in council, and wept when she saw the wall of names in the glass hall. Every dead, every lost, remembered. They held council together for a week, and the city's folk crowded the square just to glimpse them, 2 queens, neither crowned, laughing and arguing and working. When Sansa departed, she left behind barrels of honey and grain and took with her 3 orphans, promising them a place in Winterfell's kitchens. Winter came again, gentler this time. The city did not starve. The parks were swept clear for skating, and in the glass hall, the lanterns glowed all night. Children reading and playing, elders debating old battles and new songs. Daenerys grew older. Her hair turned white, her hands knotted with work and years. She spent more time by the river, watching the current, thinking of all the faces she had loved and lost, all the wounds that still ached, but no longer bled. Tyrion, his wit undimmed, still teased her. Grey Worm told stories to the youngest. Daenerys married, her wedding celebrated by the whole city in a riot of flowers and song. The orphans she had raised now had children of their own. The council grew larger each year. No one forgot the fires or the fear, but memory became the ground on which they built, not the wound by which they were ruled. And so the city endured, sometimes in laughter, sometimes in tears. The seasons turned, and with each turning, the story of Daenerys and her city grew, carried on the tongues of traders and poets and the laughter of children. In the end, it was not thrones or dragons or banners that lasted, but the simple stubborn peace wrought from pain. The light through the glass hall, the bread on the table, the names on the wall, the song at dusk. These were the true treasures, guarded fiercely, passed from hand to hand, year after year, a gift that could not burn, could not be stolen, could not die.